Hello, friends. Today we are going to study about external and internal adaptations in xerophytes. Last time we have studied about adaptations in the hydrophytes. Now today's topic of our discussion is xerophytes. Now this is a very peculiar group of the plants which grows at the places where there is dry soils are there, or the substratum is very dry. There are little traces of moisture content in the soil. Now such situations are called as xeric situations, dry situations, where the moisture content in the soil is very little or it is scanty. Now, the certain plants they grows very nice or beautifully in at such places where the water traces in the soil are very little or they are absent. Still, the plants grow there very nicely because of the morphological and anatomical adaptations developed in them. For example, if we visualize the desertic situations, the desert situations are characterized by low moisture in the soil because of very low rainfall in those places. Beside this, there is a sandy soil. The sandy soil have low water holding capacities. The sandy soil loses the water content very quickly. So the scarcity of moisture is there. Now, beside this, the desert habitats are also characterized by very high temperature, very bright light, and high velocity winds are there, high blowing winds are there. All these features are very extreme, but still the plants growing in the deserts, they grows, multiply beautifully there because of morphological and anatomical adaptation. Now, such xerophytic plants which grow at the dry areas, dry places, dry habitats where the scarcity of moisture is there in the soil, such plants are also found in our region also. For example, at the places where the rocky soil is there, sandy soil is there, for example, at mountainous places or at other places where the soil is very dry, the plants still grow there. For example, our Kadunimba plant, a neem plant we call, acacia babal plant, your corpod plant, aloe plant, your agave gaipath plant, nerium kaner plant. These plants, boar plant, jijipus, our boar plant is also a xerophyte. Beside this, there are numerous plants coming under this category which grows very nicely, though there are little or scanty traces of water in the soil, water, scanty traces of moisture in the soil or substratum. Such plants are called as xerophytes. Such plants are called as the xerophytes. These plants develops very beautiful adaptive features which helps them to cope up with means to fight with, to tackle with the extreme situation at such habitats. Such plants are called as xerophytes. Such plants are called as the xerophytes. Now about the description of the xerophytes and about the listing of the morphological and anatomical adaptation. Xerophytes, as we discussed earlier, the plants which are living in dry or xeric condition are called or known as xerophytes. Now, these xerophytic habitats are of two types. At certain places, there is a physical dryness is there. For example, in these habitats, the soil has little amount of water due to the inability of the soil to hold the water because of low rainfall. For example, the desert soils, sandy soils, Valukamay soils we call in Marathi, the such soils have the low water holding capacity. Soil do not hold the water for longer time, do not remains moist for a longer time. It loses the water and becomes dry. Besides such physical dryness of the soil, there are certain places where there is a physiological dryness is there. In such a situation, in these habitats, water is sufficiently present, but the plants are unable to absorb the water present because of the absence of capillary spaces. For example, plants in the salty or acidic soils, for example, the salty water of the oceans, the plants grow along the coast, but the water thus present is highly concentrated, and such water is useless for the growth of the plants. And it seems that the plants are growing in the water, but such habitats are regarded as physiological dry habitats for these plants, and they are like the desert habitats. There is unavailability of the useful water for the growth of the plants. Based on the adaptive characters, the Xerophytes are classified into three categories. They are called as ephemerals, succulents, and non-succulents, or true Xerophytes. Now let us consider first the ephemerals. The ephemeral, these are also called as drought escaping plants or drought evaders. These plants complete their life cycle within a short period of time, for example, in a single season or a month or in a few weeks. The plants complete their life cycle. For example, in our region, with the onset of the rainy season, certain plants along the roadsides and at the west places, they fastly grow, germinate, the seeds germinate, the plants fastly grows, flowers, produces the fruits, and the seeds are dispersed. So after the rainy season, there starts a dry period, and before the starting of the dry period, these ephemeral plants complete their life cycle by production of the seeds for the next season to germinate. So such plants are called as drought escaper plant. Escaper means before the onset of starting of the dry period, the life cycle is completed. These plants are called drought escaping plants or ephemerals. For example, over here, this is the image of your beloved plant, Arjumon mexicana. Arjumon mexicana. This is a classical example of ephemeral plant. Now, in addition to the Arjumon, there is a very common plant, Tribulus tephrosia. These are examples of the ephemerals. For example, Tribulus means our sarata plant. In Marathi we call tephrosia unali plant, which we called in Marathi. These plants shortly grows in the season and complete the life cycle in the same season. So such plants are called as ephemeral plants. Now, the second group of the plants is called succulents. Second group of the plants is called as succulent plant. These are also called as drought enduring plants. Drought enduring plant. For example, we know a classical example of aloe or corpid plant, our agave plant, and many succulent cactus plants which comes under this category of succulents. Now, the plant body of these plants, their all organs, the stem, leaves, roots, they are swollen and stores more of water when it is available. For example, very beautiful example is the aloe, which we see very commonly. These plants stores the water when it is available, and this stored water is economically used in the dry period, in the drought situation. The stored water is used, and these plants successfully perenniate, successfully tackled with, successfully passes the dry summer, dry periods, coming dry period. So this is about the succulents. For example, corpet plant, agave, gaipath plant, opensia, cactus plants, and numerous other examples of the succulents are there. Now, beside the succulent, the third category of The third category of the xerophytes is called as non-succulents, or these are also called as drought-resistant or true xerophytes. For example, under this category, the gibbous plant, boar plant, our acacia, bubble plant, our nerium, our suru plant, casuarina, these plants they comes under this category. Our calotropis rui plant comes under this category of non-succulent. This is the group of the non-succulent plants. For example, classical example is of Ziziphus and Acacia bubble plant, boar plant and bubble plant. These are the excellent examples of non-succulents. Khair plant is also there. Different species of acacia and bear are they comes under this category of non-succulents. Now these plants successfully grows there and facing the drought very nicely. Therefore, these are called as a true xerophytes or drought resistant xerophytes. Now let us start with what anatomical morphological adaptations these xerophytes they shows. Now, in these xerophytes, let us consider the first organ, root. The root system is well developed and is greater than that of the shoot system. The root system is very long, deep growing in the soil. For example, in Acacia juliflora, which we called in Marathi as Vedi babul plant, which grows along the roadsides. The roots of this plant grows about 30 meter in the soil. So this is the deepest root growing in the soil, in the soil, in search of the water trusses, So as compared to the shoot system, branching and height, the roots are longer in the height, longer in the length, which have penetrated in the soil. And these roots are very well developed with the root hairs and root caps protect the root tips while penetrating into the deep and hard substratum in search of the water. And whatever the traces of moisture are there, they should be absorbed nicely. For this purpose, they have the root hairs. Root hairs are there, root caps are also there, and this is how the root system is very well developed in these plants. Now, about this stem. In these plants, the stem is very hard and it is woody, spiny, rough, and very stout, stunted, aerial, or it may be underground. So these are the morphological adaptations in the stem. The stem is very hard, it is very woody, tough, strengthful, stout, rough, and coarser to the touch. It may be very thorny, spiny, it may be aerial, growing in the air, or it may be underground. The stems and leaves are covered with the wax. Wax means wax. Just as we get the wax on the calotropis leaves, rui stem and leaves shows deposition of the wax on it. And this wax helps in avoiding the desiccation, drying of the leaves in calotropis rui plant. So this is a protective wax coating. Wax means our main in Marathi we call wax coating means it is a protective coat developed on these xerophytic plant stems and the leaves. In some xerophytes, all the internodes in the stem are modified into the fleshy structures called phylloclades. For example, opuntia. In opuntia plant, The stem is modified into the leaf-like structure we call it as phylloclade. The stem itself looks like a leaf. It is green in color, covered with the spines, and this leaf-like modification of the stem in opensia plant, sabar plant in Marathi we call, it is called as phylloclade. It is called as the phylloclade. In some of the other single or occasionally two internodes modified into the fleshy green structures called cladode, for example, in asparagus. In our shatavari plant, our campus have at many places the asparagus shatavari climber. This climber shows cladodes. This is a modification of the stem seen in the Shatavari climber. Shatavari climber shows the development of the cladode. Now, beside this, in some of the plants, the petiole is modified into the fleshy leaf-like structure. For example, phylloid acacia. For example, in acacia melanoxylon. In acacia melanoxylon, the leaf petiole is modified into the leaf-like structure. We call it as phylloid. For example, over here, this is the image showing a phylloid. This is seen in Acacia melanoxylon. This plant is known as Australian acacia plant. This Australian acacia plant shows leaf-like structures. These leaf-like structures, in fact, these are not leaf-like structures, but they are the petioles modified into the broader lamina-like leaves. In fact, these are not the leaves, this is a modification of the petiole. We call it as phylloid. We call it as a phylloid seen in Australian acacia. Name is Acacia melanoxylon. Now, as we have discussed about the phylloclade, this is Opuntia phylloclade. The morphology of the plant looks like leafy structures placed one above the other and grown. This leafy stem is a modification of the stem called phylloclade. So this is adaptation. This is a morphological adaptation seen in the plants, and it is also spiny. It is also spiny. The leaves are modified into the spines. Now, beside this, in certain cases, the leaves are modified into the stipular spines. So, over here, suppose this is the plant, it shows the leaves are modified into the stipule-like very small structures called stipules, called as the stipules. So, this is about the certain characteristic modifications, adaptations seen in the xerophytes. Now, a succulent xerophyte, phylloclade, as we have seen the image of Saber opensia plant. Now, non-succulent perennials, for example, in our region, there is a plant called Capparis, our Kiral plant. The stem itself is green in color, very crowdedly branched, and it shows the leaves totally absent. The leaves are modified into the spines. Leaves are modified into the spines. This species of Capparis is called Capparis aphylla, or it is also have the synonymous name Capparis decidua. Capparis aphylla means A means absent. The leaves are absent. Capparis aphylla. Phylla means the leaves in Capparis, Kiral plant. Then we have also discussed about the asparagus cladode. We have to see the asparagus climber in the campus. And we have to discuss about the phylloid, which is seen in Australian acacia plant, where the leaf petiole is modified into the lamina-like true leaf blade-like structure. We call it as phylloid. So this is all about the adaptations seen in the stem. Now, morphological adaptations in the leaves, how the leaves of these xerophytes they are. The leaves of the xerophytes are usually leathery. They are very thick and skin like leathery. They are very thick and many times they are shiny to reflect the and light and the heat. So this is sort of morphological adaptation in the leaves. Leaves are very tough, very thick, very thick, mucilaginous, covered with the wax. They are leathery and they are covered with the wax. They are covered with the very shining white hairs to reflect the light to avoid the heating effect created due to the solar radiations. So, the drying of the plant body is avoided by the shiny nature of the leaves, the presence of the hairs on the leaves, the presence of the wax coated on the leaves, help in avoiding the reflection of the light helps in avoiding the reflection of the light. For example, in our rui plant, Calotropis, the total leaf and stem is covered with the wax. This is for the avoiding the desiccation of the leaves and stem due to the dryness of the soil and the stress exerted on the plant body due to because of the solar radiations. So waxy coating on the leaves of Calotropis rui plant avoids it from burning, desiccation or drying. In some plants like Euphorbia, Acacia, Ziziphus, Caparis, the stipules are modified into the spines. So we have discussed this point in our boar plant, bubble plant, Kiral plant. The stipules are modified into the thorns or spines, prickles, or the entire leaves are modified into the spines. For example, in Opuntia plant or your Sabar plant, in Opuntia plant, the leaves are totally modified into the spines, or they are reduced to scales in Satavari plant. They are reduced to scales in asparagus plant. So this is all about morphological adaptations in the stem, root and leaves. Now anatomical adaptations. Now we have to discuss about the anatomical adaptations. Now anatomical adaptations include the presence of multi-layered epidermis. Epidermis is multiple. Instead of single layer, the epidermis is present in many layers. One layer, suppose one layer, second layer, third layer, fourth layer, 3 to 4 layers are there. This is called as multi-layered nature of the epidermis. And such a multi-layered epidermis is also deposited with the heavy cuticle on it. There is a heavy cuticle on it. The cuticle is of wax, cutin, suberin, lignin, or silicon salts are deposited on the epidermis. So this is a sort of extra kavach, extra coating sheath encrusted on the epidermis to have the nice protection. So presence of heavy cuticle, this is the anatomical adaptations in the xerophyte. Such cuticle is totally absent in those hydrophytes. So this is sort of anatomical adaptation, multi-layered epidermis and presence of heavy cuticle. Now beside this, the hypodermis is well developed with sclerenchymatous tissues in certain hydrophytes. The stomata are of sunken type. The stomata are of the sunken type. They are the opening pores or apertures helping for respiration and transpiration. These are present in the depressions. They are present in the cavities. Such stomata are called as sunken stomata present in the depressions or cavities and they are below the level of other epidermal cells. It is called as sunken stomata. Now in certain xerophytes, for example in succulents, there is a scotoactive type of stomata is there. For example, in succulent plant, the stomata remains open during the night time and it is closed during the daytime so as to avoid the process of transpiration. The water loss from the plant body should be avoided, and therefore in the sunny daytime these plants they remains closed their stomata which opens during the night only. This is called a scotoactive type of stomata to which helps in reducing the loss of water through the respiration. Now beside this, the next anatomical adaptation in these plants is the conducting tissues or vascular tissues are very well developed. They are very numerous and very well developed. So this is opposite to the hydrophytes. In the hydrophytic plants, the vascular tissues or conducting tissues are very reduced, either represented by one or two. Here, they are always numerous. So whatever the traces of water is there in the soil, this water should be absorbed by the roots and it should be conducted through the stem. So for conduction purpose, nice capillary action conducting tissues are very well developed. They are very well developed. Now, beside the nice development of the conducting or vascular tissues in these plants, there is a mesopyle in the stem. There is a mesopyle in the stem. For example, numerous xerophytes are there, of which the stem itself is green in color. For example, in Opensia, your saber plant, the leaves are absent, they are modified into the spines. So who will do the photosynthesis? The stem it does. The stem have the photosynthetic tissues, it is green in color, it do the function of photosynthesis. Same is the case with Capparis. The leaves are absent. Who do the photosynthesis? The stem does it. The stem contains internally the mesopyle tissue. The mesopyle tissue is the photosynthetic tissue, and this tissue is present in the stem. This is an anatomical adaptation in the xerophytes. To cope up the absence of the leaves, the photosynthesis function is performed by the stem itself due to the presence of mesopyle internally in the stem part. Now beside this, there are the succulent plants which shows presence of water storage tissues or cells. So possessing the water storage region in the succulents, this is the anatomical adaptation in the succulents. Now over here, this is a figure of nerium leaf. This is a figure of the nerium leaf showing the presence of multiple epidermis. Presence of multiple epidermis. So over here in the figure, 3 layers are there. 1, 2, 3. 3 layers are there. This is called as multi-layered epidermis or multiple epidermis. And this multiple epidermis forms a screen which avoids the hitting effect of the leaf. Now, to help to help to help this epidermis function, this epidermis is also protected, also deposited with the cuticle on it. There is a cuticle layer on the epidermis, and such a multiple epidermis deposited with the cuticle act as a very beautiful protective sheath or kavach cell around the plant body in the nerium leaf. So this is about the internal adaptation present in this in the form of multiple epidermis. Now beside this, this nerium leaf shows a well developed photosynthetic tissue divided into two types. There is a palisade tissue is there, the spongy tissue is there. These together constitute the mesopyle tissue, photosynthetic tissue. Now beside this, the same leaf shows this lower epidermis is also covered with the cuticle, and the stomata are present in the lower epidermis. The stomata are present in the lower epidermis. This is a lower epidermis and stomata are present over here. This is lower epidermis. Epidermis is like this. Epidermis is like this. This is a cavity. This is a cavity. This is a cavity and stomata is present over here. Stomata is present over here. This is a stomata. Such stomata is called sunken stomata, present in the depressions, in the lower epidermis. So restriction of the stomata or presence of the stomata towards the lower epidermis, in the lower epidermis only, this is the anatomical adaptation. This is anatomical adaptation in the xerophytes. Now beside this, for example in the succulents, uh, as we have discussed, there is a water storage tissues are there. Water is stored in the water storing tissues. Suppose over here, these are the water storage cells. Whenever the water is there, the water is stored in the water storing tissues. For example, this is in the succulent plant. This is the figure of succulent plants. This is a figure of peperomia, which is a succulent, where the water storage tissue is present. Now, over here, to discuss the anatomical or internal adaptations, we have the section of Capparis aphylla, our Kiral plant. In practical, we take the DS of this stem to study the internal adaptations seen in the Capparis. For example, over here, this section shows epidermis. The epidermal cells are radially elongated and they forms a very strong cell protective epidermis, protective kavach, protective uniseriate layer of the cells. And this epidermis is also deposited with the cuticle. There is a coating of cuticle. The cuticle may be of wax in Capparis. So this is about the skin of the xerophytic plant, Capparis. Epidermis deposited with the extra coating on it, we call it as a cuticle. Now, in addition to this Capparis stem shows the presence of palisade tissue, a photosynthetic tissue. Photosynthetic tissue should be present in the leaves, but this plant have no leaves, and therefore, to perform the function of photosynthesis, the photosynthetic cells tissue is there in the stem. This is a photosynthetic tissue. This is palisade-like, columnar cells-like, containing the photosynthetic pigments in it. By this fashion. These cells are radially elongated and they are columnar cells like compactly placed and contain the photosynthetic pigments. So presence of palisade tissue, photosynthetic tissue in the stem, this is the anatomical adaptation. Now beside this particular stem shows very well developed mechanical tissues. This is a pericycle over here. This is a patch of pericycle. Harder sclerenchyma cells, sclerenchyma tissue composes the pericycle, which gives a mechanical strength to the Capparis stem. Presence of mechanical tissues well developed. This is the anatomical adaptation. Now, beside this particular stem shows the numerous xylem elements. This row of xylem elements. All these are the xylem elements. They are very numerous. Xylem elements are very numerous, present in the rows. So this is sort of conducting tissues or vascular tissues present in the form of xylem elements, which are very numerous. So conducting tissues, water conducting tissues are very well developed. They are very numerous in the xerophytes. So this figure shows anatomical adaptations like presence of a cuticle, epidermis, presence of photosynthetic tissue, palisade, presence of mechanical tissues well developed, and the stem shows internally the numerous conducting elements. We called it as xylem elements. The conducting tissue is nicely developed. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These four are the adaptations seen in the capillary stem. So this is all about the internal and external adaptations in the xerophytes and about the futures of the xeric conditions and how the plant they develop, different structural changes in these, different structural changes in the morphology and internal structure, which helps them or which enables them to fight with the scarcity of moisture, high temperature, bright light, high speed wind currents, high blowing winds, high velocity winds, to face with all the extreme features of these habitats. These plants, they easily cope up, or these plants easily fights. So we have to remember the morphological adaptations and internal adaptations. So for internal adaptations, we have to prepare this figure. We have to prepare the DS of comparison. This figure should be prepared. Now beside this is the one more figure. We can also prepare this figure. This nerium leaf or the comparison. These figures, they should be prepared. And for the morphological adaptations, we should sketch this is the phylloclade of Opuntia plant. It can be sketched. This is easy to sketch also. So this is all about morphological and anatomical adaptations in the xerophytes. So if you have any doubts regarding the morphological and anatomical adaptations, you can ask me on our WhatsApp group. I will reply your questions. So with this, I stop over here. Dhanyavad.